Click the bell icon to get latest videos from Ekeeda.
Hello friends, we'll be further studying about the last part of this chapter, which is types of reserves. Now, as you know, reserves is something that is used for retention of profit for strengthening the financial condition of the company. We'll further evaluate what are the types of reserves that we have and we'll further classify them into different categories. Let's go ahead and see them out. When we speak about types of reserves, that means we are basically talking about reserves that have been created already for the retention or probably for strengthening the financial condition of the company. Now, the first most important thing is to know what reserves are created for. Reserves basically talk about, or they let us know about, how these specific reserves will help in strengthening the financial condition of the company. Hence, when we speak about reserves, it is also all about segregating profit and loss account. Segregating profit and loss account doesn't mean that you divide profit and loss account or you reduce profit and loss account. It means you create profit and loss account into batches. That's how a reserve is always created. Now we have different types of reserves available with us. We have general reserve, we have specific reserves, we have revenue and capital reserves. These are the four main categories that you'll go through or you'll understand the definitions of it. Once these reserves are created, there are furthermore differences between revenue and capital reserve, and the last kind of reserve that we have is a secret reserve. We'll go by topic one by one and we'll understand what each and every reserve means. Now, to go with the first topic, we have general reserve here. I've mentioned down certain things here. Let's go ahead and understand what each of these definitions mean for us. So when we talk about general reserve, this is a freely utilized reserve. It can be used for any of the specific purpose that we want to, or it can be used for any of these definitions when we talk about reserves. Now, a reserve is something that you use when there is a contingency or probably when there is additional requirement for any funds. So if supposingly there is a result or probably there is division of shares or distribution of dividend that you have to give for, you give it out of your reserves, you give it out of your surplus profit that you have. That means any profit where you have excess or any much addition that you have in terms of profit, that part is used as reserves, which is shown under the capital side or on the liability side under capital category. Once this specific reserve has been classified as general, that means it can be used for any reason, whatever has been mentioned in the question or whatever usage the company wants to use it for. After general reserve, we have specific reserves. Let's go ahead and find out what are the things that we have mentioned under specific reserve. Now, as the name states, specific reserve, that means it is specifically used for a purpose and it is not just freely available like the general reserve that we have. When it comes to specific purpose or a secret reserve or a specific reserve, that specific reserve will be used for that specific fund for which it has been created. For example, workman compensation fund. Now, this specific reserve has been created when in terms of any mishap that happens in a company when it comes to workman union or any workman that gets injured due to any kind of production performance. At that point of time, the compensation that is provided to the employee or to the workman is given from this specific fund. Hence, at the end of every financial year, when the segregation of profit is done, the profit is also segregated into these kind of reserves. To give you more examples, we have debenture redemption reserve. This reserve will always be used for redemption of debentures. Now, debentures, that is the loan that is taken from investors and we further go ahead and repay that loan. So, at the end of the specific tenure, when the loan has to be repaid, if it is supposed to be repaid on a premium, that means if the loan was taken at rupees 10 and you're supposed to give out rupees 12 on every debenture, the additional 2 rupees will be paid from this specific reserve. Hence, it is known as a debenture redemption reserve and is categorized under the category of special reserve or probably a specific reserve that we can call about. Let's go ahead and further evaluate what are the different kind of reserves we have, like the revenue reserve and the capital reserve. So if we classify it further, we have revenue reserve. Now, revenue reserve is created out of the revenue profit. That means out of the normal operating profit that we earn via our business transactions. Now, if you give you, or probably to give you more idea about operating profit and non-operating profit. Operating profit is something that results out of the basic business transactions that you do day in, day out. That means if you have a garment making company and the profit that you earn out of selling out of garments is known as a revenue profit. However, when you talk about a non-operating profit, that means a capital reserve, that is something that you earn or you gain out of any non-business transaction. Just take an example, the same thing that we talked about earlier, that means a garment company that you have. And if you're selling out garments, you get revenue profit out of this. However, there is a special land that you have, there is a separate land that you have. And if you have sold out that land, any profit that you earn or any gain that you have on that specific transaction will be termed as a capital reserve. Hence, it is a non-operating activity and not related to your business at all. Hence, the reason why we classify revenue reserve and classic reserve here, or probably when we talk about revenue reserve and capital reserve, we always talk about operating and non-operating activity. Operating activity will be termed as revenue reserve activities and non-operating will be termed as capital revenue activities or probably capital reserve activities. We'll further go ahead and classify what examples can be shared when it comes to revenue reserves. Revenue reserve is mostly related to operating activities, hence the business transactions or where the business itself has these specific transactions and the amount that is earned over and above the expenses, that will be termed as revenue reserve. This will be specifically used for all things that we require when it comes to business transactions. Let's go ahead and further evaluate what we have when it comes to capital reserve. Capital reserve, as you know, is always related to any kind of thing which is non-business activity. Sale of land which is not related to your activity or which is not your business at all, or anything, if you sell out your car, if you sell out any of your assets which are not related to your business. In such cases, if there is any profit on that thing or any gain on that part, in that cases you need to understand the profit that you have earned is capital profit and not a revenue profit. We'll further see what are the examples that we have for both of these things. As we say that revenue is out of business activities, that means it will be used only for business specific purposes and not for non-business specific purposes. Whereas revenue and capital clubbed together will form the part of reserves. Now let's talk about capital reserve, which is also a part of reserves formed out of non-business activities. As this specific reserve is formed out of non-business activities, we have these specific reserves being used for utilization of non-business activities. Like we can give out these capital profit when it comes to giving securities premium on issue of shares or redemption of debentures or creation of any general reserve here. Hence, any reserve which has been used generally will be used under the category of capital reserve, and anything which is related to specification of business, that means a redemption that has been used for any kind of fund which was earlier created, and if there is certain activities related to the business. So for workman compensation fund, if there is something that you need to add up to, you can use this revenue reserve, which will be again a part of workman compensation fund. So if you know, you can get the difference between revenue reserve and capital reserve. We'll further divide these things into differences on three parts. Let's understand what these three parts are, and you'll find out the difference between revenue reserve and capital reserve. Now, when we speak about the differences between the revenue and capital reserve, there are 3 points that we need to understand. Let's understand the difference between these two things under one category, the first point. Source. When we talk about differences between the source of these two reserves, revenue is earned out of revenue profits and capital is earned out of capital profits. Now, the next difference that we have is the purpose. When we talk about the purpose of these specific things or these specific reserve, revenue is used for operational activities itself, whereas capital is used for non-business or non-operational activities. We'll have mentioned certain things here. We'll further go ahead and see what are these differences, what we're talking about. So when we talk about purpose, This revenue reserve has been specifically created for a specific purpose and not for any other thing which is not related to the business. However, when we talk about capital reserve, it is created as a compliance of law. That means a regulatory requirement which is as per the law itself. Any regulatory requirement which is required or to be followed is known as compliance of law. This thing has to be created as the law state itself. So if you have learned about accounting standards earlier, accounting standards do define about creation of reserves with a specific reason when it comes to any kind of capital reserve. So if the law states that the company has to create capital reserves for future requirement, it may be referred to any kind of future requirement that the company will need in terms of issue of shares, redemption of shares, issue or forfeiture of any kind of shares that we have, etc. Hence, a capital reserve is a compliance of law, whereas the revenue reserve is to ensure that the financial strength of the company is tightened up and the statement of the profit and loss account and balance sheet shows a good side of the company. Let's go on to the third point and figure out what is the third difference that we have under which we can classify revenue reserves and capital reserves. Third point is usage. So the first point that we have learned is the property that has been ensured, that is the storage part, the purpose, and the third part is usage. So the source, purpose, and usage are the three categories under which you can differentiate revenue reserve and capital reserve. We have already learned about the properties when it refers to the source and the purpose. We'll learn about what usage means when it comes to differentiation. Now, as you have learned that revenue is referred to a specific purpose. Now, it is not anything that we can call as a general reserve. It is specially embarked upon or to follow these things. When we talk about specially embarking, that means specifically created for a specific kind of fund. However, when we talk about general reserves or when we talk about capital reserve, that can be used for anything. It can be used for debenture or redemption reserves, or probably when we talk about debenture redemption reserves, it may be debentures, it may be shares. So anything where excess money is required for non-operational activities, capital reserves can be used. So this is about the differentiation when we talk about capital reserve, when we talk about revenue reserve. Let's go further and find out what are the things or what are the other types of reserves that we have. Let's go ahead and note down these things. Now, when we talk about secret reserve, that is the last type of reserve that we have here under the classification, it does not appear in balance sheet. As you can see from the name, it's secret with a specific reason. It doesn't appear in balance sheet and it has been created with a specific purpose and under different methods. So when we talk about creation of secret reserve, it can be created via different ways. Let's go ahead and find out what are the different ways that can be used. But before that, let's understand why this reserve is created. Now, this reserve is created with a specific reason to disclose the profit and loss or tax liability. If we want to reduce our tax liability by a certain number, not by a huge margin, by a certain number itself, by a negligible margin, then we create this reserve. This is just like a piggy bank for us. In case, if you remember, when we were small, we used to handle all the amount or all the cash flow into segregated parts. We used to keep certain amount with us for a personal usage. That is known as a secret reserve. So when the company creates a secret reserve, that is for the personal usage in terms of any kind of exigency that might come up in the later part of the company running or the production time, that's when this specific reserve is used as the last resort. Once this has been done, you can finally understand what are the things that you need to understand when it comes to creation of secret reserve. Hence, when we speak about secret reserve, this is absolutely created as a secret part and is not disclosed in the balance sheet. Hence, when we talk about strengthening the financial situations, this also is a part of the secret reserve or the reserves and provisions when we talk about. Let's go ahead further and discuss more about these kind of secret reserves that we have. We'll give you certain examples which will clarify the details or the doubts you have in you right now. Now, as you know, secret reserves can be merged with the profit during the lean period. Now, what do you mean by lean period? Lean period is a period between which the financial year can be called as a midterm year. Lean period is nothing but the period where the tax liability or the formation of tax liability close or comes to an end. Now, when we talk about the excessive period or the high period, if we can call, that is the period when you have to file out your returns, when you have to go further ahead and make the transactional changes when it comes to any kind of financial profit and loss preparation or preparation of balance sheet. That is the period when we call that there is an excessive usage or excessive usage of accounting technologies and terms when it comes to preparation of balance sheet. That's at the end of the year. However, in the midterm or in the quarter 2 and quarter 3, when there are no returns that are supposed to be filed, that's period where you can term it as a lean period. During that time, secret reserves can be merged with the profits. Hence, this is known as a secret reserve and created at a specific time itself. Now, how do you create? What are the different methods? We have mentioned down certain methods here. Let's further go ahead and evaluate each of this method. The first method can be stated as follows. Secret reserve can be created by undervaluation of stock. So if the stock is costing, or if the value of the stock is 10 lakhs, and if you have created an undervalued stock, that means you have shown the value of the stock as rupees 9 lakhs. You have saved rupees 1 lakh. This stock can be further valuated and can be further moved to secret reserve. That means the difference between 10 lakh and 9 lakh, that is 1 lakh, can be shown under the category of secret reserves. This is one specific method. Let's go ahead and find out the second method now. Making excessive provisions. When we talk about creating provision, we create a provision with a certain reason. If we are expecting that there can be a loss of 10 lakhs, and we create a provision of 15 lakhs, that means we have actually made excessive provision thinking that the additional 5 lakhs can be used as secret reserve. So apart from undervaluing the stock, we can also create excessive provision whereby the same thing can be used as a secret reserve part. And the last method that can be used to create secret reserve is as follows. Let's go ahead and find out what that exactly means. Showing contingent liabilities as actual liabilities. Now, the word contingent means something that may or may not happen depending on the current situation or on the current activities. It can also mean that it may happen due to happening of certain other activities. Like, if to give you an example, I'll give you 100 bucks if it rains right now in next 5 minutes. Now, this is certain, or probably this can be contingent. If it rains, then I have to give you. That becomes an actual liability. But it depends on happening or not happening in the next 5 minutes. If it doesn't happen in next 5 minutes, that means I'm not supposed to pay you. That is known as contingent. So when we talk about contingent, if we show a contingent liability that may or may not happen in near future, or is supposed to be shown as a liability only when it actually happens, and if we're actually showing that thing before time, that means we're creating or we're converting that contingent liability into actual and showing it as a liability. Hence, the amount or the excess amount that is shown as a liability is a part of secret reserve. Now, these reserves will always be shown under the capital side or below the capital category. Hence, you need to look out, or when you're going for an audited balance sheet, you need to look out how many secret reserves they have and whether these things are actually a secret or an actual liability itself. If it is an actual liability, there is no problem in it. However, if the contingent asset has been shown or contingent liability has been shown as an actual liability, you need to further go ahead and evaluate what kind of reserve it is. Is it a secret reserve? Is it a capital, revenue, or any other kind of reserve that we have studied? So in this chapter, we have studied about the types of reserve, the categories of reserve, and how these reserves are created along with the differences when it comes to comparison. So if you have a question about type of reserve, you can do mention about these kind of reserves that you have along with the differentiation. And if you mention certain examples, that will be an added advantage, or it can be a value add for you. So that's it for the day. Thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned with Ekeeda and keep subscribing to Ekeeda.